Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about Facebook losing $225 billion of value in one day on the stock market, the largest historical loss in history, and what it means for the future of Dungeons and Dragons. Let's get into this. All right, so and I'll encapsulate this. You get problems when you win too hard. And Dungeons and Dragons might be in that zone. They may be getting to that zone where they're winning too hard. Okay? Because Facebook just got in a lot of trouble for this. All right. So let's talk about Facebook. So Facebook just lost 200. It happened this week, last week. They lost $225 billion of value in a single day on the stock market. It was the largest loss in American. It was the largest loss in history, right? Like, since the stock market began, which is like in the early 1900s. So over close to 100 years, I think, right? And which the whole history of the stock market, right? Like, huge loss. Now, why did that happen, right? So one, I was talking with my wife about this, my poor wife. I'm just a huge news hound, right? And I want to talk about it. So I was like, hey, wife, this thing happened with Facebook. And she's like, oh man, that's a lot. That's a huge loss, but I bet their executives feel bad. And by the way, my wife don't care about Facebook losing, but she cares about me. She loves me, and I want to talk about this stuff when I hear it, especially when it's like really dramatic, right? And then sometimes, and she don't care about none of this. Like she don't really like the news, right? But she cares about me, and a lot of times, if there'll be days and days where I won't see anybody, right? Like just because the way shape of life, right? And so she ends up talking with me about these things, and to pay her back for that, I'm trying to be massively sacrificial in a whole bunch of other ways that are very meaningful, and return what I owe her for her incredible love for me, right? And so basically she said something really fascinating. She's like, what did they do to cause this, right? And I was thinking about it, and Maya said, I don't think they did anything to cause this, right? The reality is this is a wound from momentum, right? And what I mean by that, and I'm going to try to sell this to you, right? I don't think Facebook did a single thing wrong. I really don't. I think they've been crushing it. They've been really doing a great job. But what happened was they won too hard, right? They want and this is the warning for Dungeons and Dragons. You got to recognize when you win too hard, right? Because Facebook was just doing a great job. They were the top, social media, right? And they owned local advertising, right? And you would just advertise on Facebook, and you would get a whole bunch of money, and everything would work out. Like, they owned local advertising. They were the top dog. They were number one in social media, and because they were number one in social media, they began to affect American politics, like, very directly, right? And they were just crushing it, doing their American capital business, right? Like, but it swung around. Right, and here I think this is the part that went too far, right? Like, the biggest one was people were like, I don't like Facebook, right? So that's why I'm on Instagram, like, and Facebook is like, that's cute, we own Instagram, like, y'all don't like us, but you literally on the second biggest social that we also own, and like our domination of you is so like complete, it looks diabolical, right? Like, it's not diabolical. We just win in with we just doing a minute winning American capitalism, and this is a very real thing, right? Like, you start it. Facebook puts up content, right? They're like they put up everybody's content, right? And because they're putting up content constantly, there's this wound from momentum, right? Like, the world is like, oh my gosh, look at that person over there working hard, putting out all this content, right? And then, and I'm over here doing nothing. But what I can do with my time is I can wait for a 1% slip on this person who's doing real content, and then I can build a furor around it, right? And then I can take that, I can take Facebook down. That's exactly what happened, right? And I think the thing that really did it in for Facebook was they made the American people angry, right? And there's a couple countries in the world where, like, if you're, like, the country's like, oh, you the people are upset, well, if you squeak, we will press you down, right, and make sure that nobody hears your squeak, right? But in America, American people roar, right? And it's heard around the world. And what really did it in was, the American people saw that Facebook was just winning too hard, right? Like they just won too much, right? And America was like, this is done, right? And America was like roared, right? And what happened is the congressmen and the congresswomen, the representatives from the House all saw this, right? Oh, and the senators all saw this, and they dogpiled, right? And they just took Facebook down, right? Like, and there was a lot of people on Twitter who were like, I'm done with Facebook, right? And so the whole thing collapsed, right? And I had to admit, like, when I read this article, I was like, legit, I ain't been on Facebook in a minute, right? Like, and just so you're aware, what's been taking a lot of the juice? You on it right now, YouTube. Like, the people are starting to really forget Facebook exists, and YouTube is eating their lunch, and it's a thing. Video is king medium, period. All right, and it's starting to look like if you don't have your own video channel, you silent. Ain't nobody hearing you, right? And so I think going forward, who's gonna be on Facebook, right? So what does Dungeons & Dragons need to learn from this? Well, they need to pay very close attention. Okay, here's the issue. Dungeons & Dragons is definitely in this position in the RPG. Like, they are winning so hard. When they look for their closest competitor, I don't think you can see them. Like, they're a dot on the horizon, right? Dungeons & Dragons is just crushing it. Vox Machina, miniatures, transform the miniatures market, books that are coming out that, like, the book drops and it just dwarfs all conversation of everything happening in the industry, right? New Dungeons & Dragons books drops, you don't get to hear nothing for 2 weeks. It's just all D&D, right? And so it is in this position where it is winning so hard against other tabletop fantasy role-playing games that it is possible they may anger the American voice of the tabletop fantasy role-playing game industry, right? And get a backlash, a swift backlash, right? And I love Dungeons & Dragons. I do not want to see this thing, damaged or hindered in any way, right? But I am definitely aware that that Dungeons & Dragons is entering Facebook era, right? Like, where there's just so much winning happening on the tabletop, on the Dungeons & Dragons side, and so little of anything else in the industry that's not connected to Dungeons & Dragons even making the slightest dent. All right, here's a good one. Star Wars FFG, fantastic game, true innovation, barely scraping by now. Not a thriving, a thriving title. And if you take a look, right, and you could see this all over, right? TTF RPGs, even if they have their own successful game, almost all of them immediately turn it into a 5e setting, right? Because they can't stand on their own. So I don't know what the next steps for Dungeons & Dragons are to acknowledge and move this forward and be careful and be aware of this problem, but I am positive that a lesson needs to be learned from Facebook, right? If you win, I think a couple years ago there was a high school football game where it was like 3 to 106, right? When you start to win, and you start winning a lot, right? You have to say, am I graciously winning? And that's where we are with Dungeons & Dragons. It has defeated every tabletop role-playing game on the planet so significantly, right, that we've reached a point where the game itself needs to say, is there any way, like, and you know what? I'll propose this. Apple was not always a highly successful company. There were years and years and years where Microsoft actually was like, we are getting very close to being called a monopoly by the U.S. government, and we need to literally significantly, practically aid Apple just so we can have a real competitor. We may be in that zone with Dungeons & Dragons, where their domination of the industry is so significant and so massive that they need to be like, we need to help this other company out. Like, somebody else in this industry needs to get a real win, right? Needs to get some actual momentum, and it's not just us, right? Now, there's no government, there's not going to be any government saying Dungeons and Dragons, your monopoly, right? But if you upset the American people, we are not silenced. Not like other people in the world, are under other governments. We are not silenced, right? So the American people, they get upset. You can have a serious problem real quick. Facebook got a serious problem. I was a big Facebook stan, right? Now I'm like, I gotta admit, I ain't been there in a while, right? Like, problems can sneak up on you quick, right? All that's my opinion. Do you see what I see? That I think we're at a point where Dungeons & Dragons has won the market so hard, right, that they're in the Facebook position where they need to be very careful about angering the whole of the tabletop role-playing game community. Love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.